Ahmed Chicktay. And coming here this morning, I was quite relaxed about my talk, and I must say now I'm really, really nervous. First, we were introduced by Manish, and he gave us all his wonderful talks, and after that, I thought to myself, oh my God, how am I going to live up to that level of talk? And I'm a geek, I'm an IT guy, and I make simple points, and I expect people to understand them. And now I've got to come up with stories and tell stories about myself. And then my son didn't do any better and created more expectation, and now I'm feeling even heavier that I now don't know anything of what I'm going to say. But Tasha and Janine, really, you've taken my talk and just gave it before me. Because you guys are living freedom, literally. And I applaud you, it's amazing. But what I think they didn't give enough attention to, a lot of what they could do was because of their parents. The parents set the foundation for their whatever it is they wanted to accomplish. And I don't think they gave enough credit to their mothers and fathers who told them to take walks and who was there when they were doubting themselves. So that's a really, really, really important part of living in freedom. But back to my talk, I've noticed that even Manish in his talk said that he doesn't like the word unschooling. I hate the word unschooling. Many people I've met don't like the word unschooling, but I didn't actually know where unschooling came from, the history behind it. And when I saw the history, I actually now love the term. And I'm going to put a video up to show you where the term unschooling came from.
These are cola nuts. They grow here. They're used to make cola-flavored soft drinks. These, on the other hand, are uncola nuts. They grow here too. But as you can see, they're a bit different from cola nuts. Rather larger for one thing. Rather juicier too, I'd say. Marvelous little things, uncola nuts. We use them, of course, to make the uncola 7-Up. It's the uncola nut that helps give the uncola its je ne sais quoi, fresh, clean taste, no aftertaste, wet, wild, all that. Marvelous, absolutely marvelous. Just try making something like that out of a cola nut. Why, it's even prettier than a cola. Nuttier than a cola, actually.
And this then came up to sort of counter that you can be uncola, and unschooling comes from that, taking that alternative route. So what has this video got to do with my talk? Well, nothing, but also everything. In that cola is the mainstream, and everybody drinks cola, and everybody knows what it is. Just like our schools. I think that there can only be one kind of soda, but there can be many kinds of sodas. And unschooling is one of those different sodas. Learning in freedom is one of those different sodas. Okay. And now do you guys think unschooling sounds weird? Cool, eh? Anyway, back to... Okay, so living and learning in freedom. Now, freedom is one of those very words that kind of have so many connotations to it. We all think we know what freedom is, and we all think we know what it isn't. And it probably is all of those things and none of those things. But the definition of freedom that I like is one that was said by Stephen Biko. And he said that freedom is the ability to define yourself with one's possibilities held back not by the power of other people. And the language he uses here is quite deliberate, because he uses the affirmative at the beginning, and then he uses the negative at the end. So when he says, freedom is the ability to define yourself, obviously that we're all unique individuals, and our authentic selves is really who we are. And when we go out into the world, if you look at Tasha and Janine, what they found is their authentic selves. Okay. But he goes on further to say, with one's possibilities means we also have the possibility to be anything we want to be. Okay? And if allowed to, if we're given the freedom to, we can be anything we want to be. But it has to come from inside. It has to come from within us. It has to be internally driven. Okay? And then the edge to that, held back not by the power of other people. And that's the world we live in today. Is society, schools, everybody's trying to narrow down our possibilities. They're trying to make us something that we may or may not be. So for me, that's true freedom. Once you can realize who you are and what you want to do, there's nothing that can actually hold you back. You would put all your life's energy into it. And what we see around us with so many kids don't know what to do with themselves, don't know what they want to do with their lives, and that is that these kids unfortunately didn't get the freedom to actually discover this for themselves. And so they end up using their later years to do this. And there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, if that's what you want to do, it's fine. But it doesn't have to be that way. That's really what I'm saying. See, if freedom is brought into people's lives much, much earlier, they can explore themselves more. So in those moments that you think children are lazy and they're doing nothing, they're not. Their minds are really, really, really busy. And you'll see them, they're kind of in a glaze. And it's part of their exploring themselves, that boredom, that doing nothing, is when they're actually discovering themselves. And when my kids were small, I used to encourage them to be bored, because boredom is where the drive and the energy comes from. If people kept Newton in school, he would never have realized why apples fall out of trees. It was his laziness that gave him those intuitions and those thinking outside the box. So freedom is really that touchy-feely stuff that is hard to pin down. Now, how much freedom do you give to your child? How much do you hold back? Now, how do you translate freedom into your real world? That's really, 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 really the question. And if we looked at the two previous speakers, literally what their parents had done over time is just increase the amount of freedom that they had. Amount of freedom that they had, not just to study, but to find who they are and what they want to do with themselves. And if that's the end product, I'll choose freedom every time. And they're not special. They're not special at all. They are special, but they're not special because everybody who has gone down the route of more freedom in their lives, that usually is the end result. People who are emotionally well-balanced, people who know what they want out of life, and people who are driven to do whatever it is that they want to do. Now, there is no good or bad futures, it's just whether it's a future you want. So I want to do a little exercise. Well, actually, what I actually wanted to do initially was, the speakers who came before me kind of changed my talk a little bit. I'm now actually talking quite off the cuff. I actually wanted to start my session by making you all sit in a straight line and separating you by age, and then looking at your hair and deciding whether it was acceptable to me to be in this session. And and obviously no laughing and talking in my session either, so you, please stop it. And how does it feel when I do that? I mean, really, how does it feel? Answer. It's not a rhetorical question. How does it feel when somebody's telling you how to sit, how to look, how to dress, what time to wake up? How does it feel? Dehumanizing, that's a great word. Dehumanizing is exactly what it is. We do this every day to children, me included. Knowing this in small little ways, we dehumanize them. The book I read and liked and hated the most was Lord of the Flies. I think it did such a disservice to children. It's a great story, but it's a bullshit story. Children that I see and meet don't ever end up being like that at all. The children I see and meet are cooperative and work together, and they do fight. I mean, it's part of finding boundaries in any relationships. All relationships have boundaries, and where those boundaries are very personal. They're very different for each and every individual. So they do that. But the only children that I see that behave that way are actually kids that go to school. I find kids that go to school very, very strange. When I speak to a kid that goes to school, it's almost like they're sussing me out, like, what's your angle? You know? And I'm just trying to have a simple conversation. Have any of you tried that? Just go and try and have a conversation with any school kid, a normal conversation. And I find it very, very interesting. They would talk to me, they would look down, and sort of like really trying to figure out what my angle is. And it makes me feel weird that I'm trying to have a normal conversation with someone. But on the other hand, I meet lots of unschoolers, I meet lots of homeschoolers. In fact, I meet a lot more homeschoolers. And it's amazing. They will talk to me as equals. They will talk to me like I'm just any other person. I'm not younger, I'm not older. And you know, I wonder why is it like that? And I think it's really that people who go alternative routes, because they're not put into situations where they're grouped with single ages, they're mostly in situations that are authoritarian, where somebody's telling them when they can go pee and when they can't. I mean, if anybody here wants to go to the toilet, please put your hand up and ask me, okay? Because I'll know better when you need to go to the toilet. For some reason, I know these things. I'm an adult. So, now I've lost my train of thought. But at the same time, there's lots of different kinds of freedom, right? I mean, a lot of the freedom we think of is political freedom, because that's what we see in the media. That's what usually is the biggest thing. We're talking about one vote one vote and voting in our political parties and whatever it is. Then there's the concept of free will. Now, what is free will? I mean, science has told us actually ultimately there isn't free will. It's just really how our minds are wired, and that drives us in a certain way. There's fears that get into our hippocampus, and before you can consciously recognize how you respond, your hippocampus has already responded. So there's free will, and then there's not so free wills. But a lot of it is still, we think about things and we decide what we want to do with ourselves. So there's that kind of freedom, free will. Then there's personal freedom, like, you know, things about the way you comb your hair, the clothes you wear. I mean, how many had kids who wanted to wear an orange pants and no shirt and go out to a wedding? No one? Is my kids the only crazy ones? But that's what they want to wear. That's who they are at that point in time. That doesn't mean when they're 27 years old and they're going to their own wedding, that's the way they're going to dress. Not at all. So what's wrong with letting them go that way? Really, what is wrong? Is it okay to let them go that way? Ooh, okay. It's a tough crowd. Then there's the freedom of thought, you know, being able to think whatever it is you want to think. And I think it's okay for kids to go dress that way to a wedding, and you all seem to think not. But, you know, that's a good example of freedom of thought. And then there's a freedom of expression. When your child's angry and talks back to you, I mean, what do? Do you allow them to express themselves? If another adult shouted back at you or gave you a snide remark, what do you do? Children generally get taken down, if I could put it that way, almost shut up, almost cut off. And it's because for some reason we see children as not human, that they don't have feelings, they don't have desires, they don't have wants, they don't know what they want or what they want to do. But actually, I'm here to tell you they actually do. I mean, my children, when they were in my wife's womb, had different personalities already. You know, the eldest one here, he used to kick like crazy. And I would actually catch one of his feet, and he would kick me with the other, okay? And when the second one came along, he never used to move at all. And we kept thinking there's something wrong, and we used to go to the doctor and say, please check, this baby doesn't move, there's something wrong. And he'd do the full check, and we'd make him do all the tests, only to uncover that he's fine, everything's fine. And literally, when he was born, he would run around like I don't know if you've ever seen one of these movies where the cat had some drugs and he's just running like crazy. That's what he used to look like. If we took him to a new place, obviously he had to dart from point to point trying to find everything in that place. And the second one would sit there and watch him like, what the hell's wrong with you? You know? So they're just so unique. Hey, see, I can make some stories. Eh? I'm talking too much. Okay, then there's the issue of spiritual freedom. You know, what do you want to believe in, what your spiritual choices are. But I'll shy away from that one. It's very close to people's hearts, so I'll try and stay away from that one. Freedom of choice, you know, the ability to choose whether you want to wear that orange pants and the green shirt and the blue shoes and obviously your Superman underwear over your pants, you know. And then, of course, we get economic freedom, intellectual, and there's a wide range of freedoms. But the freedoms I'm really interested in is the little freedoms we can do every day and allow children more freedom. That we as parents, you know, can provide by just unlearning all the baggage that we've learned over time. You know, the other funny thing about freedom is when you're free, you actually can't comprehend not being free. It's a state you're in. Freedom is not a goal to reach. Freedom is a state that you're in. And so free people can't comprehend what it is to be shackled. And people that are chained and shackled can't imagine what it is like to be free. That's why when you tame a horse and you leave it, it doesn't run away and never come back. No, that's how it's been trained. So the people that find these boundaries are the rebels. The rebels who want to break the rules. They then discover that there's boundaries here and there's boundaries over there. So for us who have been schooled, including myself, we have the chains of school and we have the chains of society very tightly around our necks. We can't imagine what it's like to be free. We can't imagine. The first thought that comes to our mind, if we give our children freedom, they'd go crazy and do whatever they want and kill people. And I wonder, is that projection from our side? Is that what we think we would do if we were free to do whatever we want? Maybe I'm not that evil. I don't think that. Maybe I should. But really, that's what it comes down to. So when I started this living and learning in freedom and learning and living in freedom, I was going to focus on children's freedoms. But what I realized is that children actually, they're the ones that live in freedom. If you watch any toddler, any kid playing, they don't think about the past, they don't think about the future. They're in that moment and they're doing whatever it is they want. Until an adult shouts, "Don't do that!" You know? Until that point, they were fine. They were doing everything. So they actually live in freedom and they don't comprehend what it's like without freedom. That's their natural state. They learn, they love, they cry, they feel emotions, they get sad, they get upset, they feel disrespected. They feel all of these things because they are little humans after all. The only difference between those little humans and us is we've learned a few things over time. We got wiser. We learned the rules of the world. We learned the rules of the society. We learned how to survive all of these things. That's the only difference. They don't know those rules yet. And they really look to us and the people around them to learn those rules. You know? And they ultimately do learn those rules. I'm yet to meet a 27-year-old who's still in a nappy. And it's not because you potty train them. It's because at some point in their lives, they saw their parents and everybody around them going to a toilet and doing the business there, and they wanted to imitate that. It's all it is. And if you didn't try and potty train them, they would still learn to do that. Just like they learn to walk, just like they learn to talk. I'm pretty sure if we try to teach them to talk, they probably won't be able to. Right, so, but now with this freedom obviously comes responsibility, because if we define freedom as to do as you want, you know, there's something that somehow needs to control this. You know, everybody can't just do what they want. And yes and no. We can do what we want and we can't do what we want. And there's a term that A.S. Neal from Summerhill used to say, freedom, but not license. And I like that term because what it means is that you're free to do what you want as long as it doesn't infringe on somebody else's freedoms. And when there's this infringement of one's freedoms on another, that's usually when the community gets together. That's usually when we create these rules and the boundaries. But if there's freedoms that don't affect anyone, or I mean, who does it hurt if your child wears an orange pants? No one. You know? So you can either use that to fight about it, or you can let it be and tell him he looks beautiful in his orange pants. But that's what it comes down to. The rules and the limitations come when freedoms intersect with each other. And even as adults, we have this problem, when we have to deal with when freedoms intersect with each other. I go to places, and I used to smoke. Even when I did smoke, I hated the smell of smoke. And when I go to restaurants and people smoke, it irritates the hell out of me. But it's one of those very same things, you know. In this case, they are harming my health, so I think I have some kind of argument. But that's the only time when you create the boundaries and the rules and the relationships is to keep order within communities. But every community can decide those rules by themselves. We don't have to go crazy about it. But in your home, you and your child, and if you had to live with adults, the rules are very different. And my question would be again, why? Why are the rules so different when we have to talk to adults and we have to deal with adults? When those little people have exactly the same experience of life. They're living life. You're not preparing them for life. Life is not coming sometime in the future. It's there right now, and they're living it. And they're loving it. When I want to be energized and motivated about life, I look at toddlers. They're my greatest inspiration. They have such an energy and such a in-the-moment look in them. I actually envy them. And it makes me sad every time we take that away with frivolous and arbitrary rules. And a lot of them are frivolous and arbitrary. I know we think it's important that you know that you must be in bed by 8 o'clock at night. But really, 8 or 5, what difference does it make? 8:30, you know? Obviously, if you have to go to school and wake up at 6 in the next morning, it's slightly different for you. But if you don't, you know, so those arbitrary rules, they limit freedom. And slowly, over time, when these children, where all this energy and spunk and drive to test all the boundaries, as you keep putting these rules on, they slowly start to lose that. I mean, how many parents have sent their kids to school and who used to have a smile on their face and a sparkle in their eye, all of a sudden lose that? I used to hate school, actually, and I was really good at school. I was a lot like Manish. I didn't need to study, and I could ace exams. I went to university. I don't think I ever went to a single class, and I used to ace exams there as well. And not that I'm smart, not at all. What I'm really good at is I know how to take tests. I know how teachers think. I know how they ask questions. And I know what they're looking for in any subject. And so I've got a BSc electrical engineering degree, but I know absolutely nothing about electricity. I can barely change a bulb, and my son's here, you can ask him. We usually wait for my brother-in-law to come over, and he sees the lights not working, and he changes the bulb. So I've always never had a value for using exams as a measurement of anything. You know, I know what I know and I know what I don't know, but people who look at my exam results think I know a lot more than I actually do. Just that it's in my head now. Somebody asked the question about the grammar. I think it was Siraj. I mean, when I was in school, I remember a teacher going on about dangling participles and all sorts of stuff, which I still don't know. But I have a 16-year-old boy who will correct my grammar on almost everything I say and write. And I don't know whether, when I'm not looking, he's off there reading grammar books or something, but, you know, I don't know where he learned grammar, but he learned it. I'm guessing he actually speaks to people other than me that actually use good grammar. But anyway, I digress again. I've covered this. that. Okay, there's just, the other day I was actually reading something from Maria Montessori. And I mean, I don't think she said anything special, but I think she was the first person I've ever seen that actually really went after parents regarding freedoms. And I say this because people who came before, people like John Holt and people like A.S. Neil and people like Homer Lane and Krishnamurti and lots of other people spoke about this but never actually looked at this directly. And Maria Montessori, in 1966, in a book called The Secret of Childhood, she says, and I'm going to quote this from her, she noted that when dealing with children, adults do not become egotistic, but egocentric. We look at everything that a child does from the perspective of an adult. We look upon a child as an empty vessel that has to be filled with our own efforts, something that is inert and helpless. We think ourselves infallible. The model upon which the child must be molded, any deviation on the child's part from adult ways is regarded as wrong and needs to be corrected. This unconsciously suppresses the development of the child's own personality. Now, I'm not going to pretend that I'm not one of those parents. I probably am. Okay, and my talk really is about the living and learning with freedom is actually a journey us as parents that we need to take this journey. We need to learn what freedom is. We need to understand how chained we are and how close-minded we are. You know, it's our journey. It's for us to figure out how can we create more freedom for our kids to be who they are. And so, I mean, Maria Montessori said this in 1966, and it's only now recently, that people are starting to talk about things like adultism, childism, and really studying these things where adultism and childism is about how adults overpower children and how we dehumanize children. And there's a lot of work being done in this area. But you know, you don't need studies to do this. You just need to look around. You go to a playground and you watch parents with their children and you see that all the time. I myself do it all the time. I mean, if my kids touch my laptop, I have a tantrum. So it's normal. So how do we as parents and adults and people who have children go about breaking these chains, living and learning in freedom? A.S. Neil he says there's 3 things every parent needs to do, and that's the only thing they need to do, is we need to have trust in our children, we need to love them unconditionally, and we need to give them our full approval. Now, if you look at the 2 girls who spoke before me, that's exactly what they got from their parents. They were trusted, they were given unconditional love, and whatever their choices were, it was approved of. And A.S. Neil, in the hundreds odd years that he's been running his school, those are the values he lived by. And that was the only thing he said that his students or the kids in his school needed, was those 3 things. And everything else will take care of itself. And now, having had 3 kids and grown him up in a similar fashion, I concur with him 100%. And speaking to other people that's been through a similar journey from all around the world, they've all had exactly the same experience. So, you know, I don't think I think we can give children a lot more freedom than we presently do. And we just need to make the effort. We need to do the hard work. Children already know freedom. We have to unshackle ourselves. We need to free ourselves and make more freedom available for them. We need to get rid of all those arbitrary rules that we may or may not have. And we all do, including myself. And yeah, I'd like to end there and maybe, questions.
I have a question, and you're the only person I think can answer this. If I don't teach my child to read, how will they learn to read? I get other stuff, but it's the reading thing, and I'm a teacher. So you can see my hang up already. I'm already looking at it through the wrong lens. So I need perspective on if I don't give you the lesson, how do you get it?
We used to have this debate all the time. She felt that reading was something totally unnatural, so we have to intervene and teach them reading. And I was always of the opinion, and I had nothing to back me up other than the fact that I knew that children live and learn everything in their lives. Just the way they learn to walk, the way they learn to talk. If they're experiencing reading in their lives, they will seek reading out. So when a child recognizes a McDonald's symbol or recognizes a Toys R Us symbol, that is reading. And I can recommend some excellent books to read about reading specifically by a gentleman called Frank Smith. Very, very good. But if I'll give you some stories about how my kids learn to read, and once again, it's nothing special. All other unschoolers go through a very similar experience. I have 3 kids, and they all 3 learned in completely different ways. The first 2 were very similar. They used to play a game called Yu-Gi-Oh!, which are these little cards. And I think they were in Japanese, and somebody translated them to English. So it had these very highfalutin words, which most of them, I myself didn't know what the words were and meant. And I used to get, me and my wife together, used to get asked hundreds of questions every day. What does this card say? What does this card say? What does this card say? And after a few months, I actually noticed that no one was asking me questions anymore. And I remember this very clearly, because when I realized nobody's asking me these questions, I got up and walked out of my office and went to go and find them, because I wanted to know, are you guys not playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Anymore, or what's going on? And they looked at me like, what do you mean? We know how to read the cards ourselves. Yeah, but like 2 weeks ago you didn't. It was like, yes, but we know how to read them ourselves now. Thank you. And it was interesting, because if I gave them a book that said the red bus, they couldn't read that. But they could read consequential and other crazy words. But after that, I didn't look back, and I think they read. Can you read? Okay. But, they also enjoyed us reading to them, which we also used to do. But if I look at my daughter, who's now 10, she hates us reading to her, so we've never read to her. And I don't think anybody else has read to her, but she's learned to read, and I don't know where or how, but she has. But what I would say, and a very important part of unschooling is that children have to live within the real world. They have to experience these things on a daily basis. So if there's people reading around them all the time, they would learn to read. If there's people gymming all the time, I have a gentleman in the back, his daughter could put a fitness program for you together. They learn from what they see and experience. I hope that answers your question.
Relax.
But what I will admit, I think it's really, really hard to comprehend children learning to read that way. Most people struggle to actually to see that, to see how that happens. But after the first child, my wife never ever debated with me again. So, for once, I was right once in my marriage.
What is so legally in South Africa? What's that framework about? And what I find so the second part of the question is, what I find myself struggling with is, as a parent who is on the journey of unschooling my child, who's now only 8, is unlearning myself.
Yes.
So where do I get the support as a potential unschooling parent to go through that process or that journey of unlearning myself?
Okay. The first one, the legal question. Okay. We apparently have an expert in the audience. But I'm just going to say a quick word before we move over to the expert. The way I understand it is the School Act and the Constitution are in conflict with each other. So right now, until it goes to court and a decision is made in court, there actually is no precedent. But I could be wrong. I'm not a lawyer, and that's the last information that I have. Okay. But I will give over to Karen Ostrom, who is an expert on this topic.
According to the SA Schools Act, every child has to go to school from the beginning, from the first school day of the year in which they turn up till the end of the year in which they turn 15, or in which they, when they obtain grade 9, whichever comes first. So it's no longer 16, it's now 15.
Okay. But do you know if there's been a court precedent on the whole issue?
Yes, it's being challenged all the time, but there's provision in South Africa, there's provision for school education and for homeschooling.
Okay.
So you're allowed to homeschool, but if you do homeschool, you have to register your child with the education department to be legal.
Okay.
Unless you have good reason not to do that. So
Okay.
good reason constitutes if you feel that it's not in your child's best interest to do the CAPS, follow the CAPS system, or if you don't want your child's privacy to be intruded upon, because you have a right to privacy according to the Constitution and paramount to all the other acts in South Africa.
And then on your next question, the interesting thing about unschooling, right? Unschooling is not a method of education, okay? It's a philosophy of life, literally. And when I say that is, children don't need to learn unschooling. Children are natural learners, and that's really what unschooling is about. It's saying, if you provide your child with the space and time, they could learn anything they want to, and they will. Okay, so the real unlearning and the real challenge is for the parents. I mean, between when my child was born to now, I've grown so much as a person, just trying to raise them in a way that I think, philosophically is the way I want to raise them. And so if you embark on a journey of unschooling, it's really a journey for parents. The kids, to them, life is completely natural. It's like breathing. We think of learning as something separate, but it actually is like breathing. You don't even know you're doing it. And that's what it's like for children. But for us who've been schooled and who've got this baggage about what education and learning is about, we've got a lot of unlearning to do. By questioning, yeah. And I mean, what used to work really well for me is I used to observe my kids a lot in terms of what they do and how they do things. And I mean, my two kids would add numbers in different ways. They would, I remember once in a car, we ended up talking about fractions. And I mean, I remember a time in Standard 5 when we started doing fractions and we all used to fail at it. We just couldn't get this concept. And yeah, I had two kids who've never been to school, have never done a math lesson, but they conceptually understood fractions in a way that just blew my mind. So, I like to observe children, and when I observe them, I just learn so much about what I take for granted is just a load of bullshit. Children prove me wrong every day.
I just wanted to add something, a resource for the teacher who was asking about how unschoolers learn to read. There's a PhD, a Dr. Alan Stone out of the UK, who wrote a book on how unschoolers learn to read. And so he did a study, he studied unschoolers for several years, 10 years or so, and that became his focus. So hopefully that'll be a good resource for you as you seek out answers. And that wasn't a question for you, so.
Just following on from what you were speaking about earlier, like if you're reading, your child will read, or if you have a book, they'll pick up a book. Do you feel that you need to provide a rich environment for your child to self-learn, or I mean, are we needing to bring in instruments in our home if that's not something we have, or things like that?
I think, the journey of a child is completely unknown. And so as much experiences as you can bring into their lives, the better. Because they're curious about everything, no matter whatever they find, they will play with it and either throw it away, but that doesn't mean that in 3 weeks' time they won't pick it up again. So, I would endeavor, obviously it's, there's resource limitation, but I would endeavor to make as much experience is available to them as possible. You know, I used to take my kids to business meetings. You know, there's no, we don't hide anything from them in our home. Everything is open. So when I do invoicing to clients, you know, it doesn't interest them. I wish it did because I could give them the job. But but yes, as much experience as possible. But you know, it comes back to you watch them, and if you watch them enough, you get to see the things that interest them. I mean, I think the two girls mentioned that earlier as well. You know, when they're watching TV, and if they're engrossed in what they're watching, then there's definitely something in there that they actually need and require and want. Okay, and I'm curious myself to know what that is, so I tend to watch myself, and even if you ask them after that, you'll be surprised how wrong you'll be. You know, it's things that, it's like a kid walking along a beach. You just never know when they're going to stop and pick up a shell. It's exactly like that, and that's exactly how children that I've experienced function.
One of the things about unschooling that frightens me is the lack of structure, or what I perceive as structure. So I feel, or the way I've grown up, there was a lot of discipline ingrained in our family upbringing. Also in our culture, the discipline that comes through religious learning and stuff like that. It's
Okay.
been, yeah. How do you actually get around the idea of just allowing your kids to
Yes.
learn freely, and yeah, how do you navigate through that space?
It's you know, we talk about freedom of children, it's also freedom of parents, is that you know, we are who we are, but we can get better. Okay, so structure is great. That's who you are, and some people are that way. And you'll even, and like I say, if you spend a lot of time with your child and you really observe them, you will find some kids actually do like structure, and it'll work well. Usually when the issues arise is when you have a child who doesn't like structure. Okay, just like there's no way I can make you used to chaos. There's no way you can make the child structured. And then you'll get children in between that spectrum. Okay, so in your situation, you either need to unlearn your issues of structure, or your issues of structure is exactly what your child needs, and then you'd use your structure. So, you know, once again, there is no recipe, there is no right answer. It really takes time and effort to get to know your children at a level that you can't if you're not around them most of the time. But yes, there's a lot of unlearning from yourself. You need to make space. Think of if your partner was not structured, how would you live together? You'll either get divorced or you'll find some mechanism to live together, right? And it's exactly the same with your child. You need to find that balance where your rights are not given up, but neither is the child's.
Generally when we speak about unschooling, the focus is on the children. And I found that it's completely the opposite way around.
Yes.
Like you rightfully said, the focus is on you as a parent and the adults more so than anything else. And what has really, really helped me a lot is the Unschoolers group of South Africa on Facebook. I'm mentioning this here because I'm a person that can't read. You can ask, as soon as I start reading a book, I fall asleep. So I can't read. I can read short articles, and this page on Facebook has helped me a hell of a lot. The TED Talks on there, I can sit and watch videos for hours. That has helped me a lot. And as well as the short articles, Sophie Christie, John Holt, and all these other guys that have been doing unschooling and teaching unschooling for many years now already. And I found that I'm changing myself more than worrying about changing my kid, if you want to put it that way. And that's what you find at the end of the day.
Often people say, how do you discipline your kids? You know, and I say, well, I don't. I discipline myself.
Very true.
You know,
That's
so the thing is, a lot of it comes back to how you are and your role modeling, and you know,
Yes.
and also the whole thing that, I mean, the other question is, do you allow freedom, or does freedom exist? Because when we say we allow freedom, that means we are again taking some authority role.
We in
But
control.
yeah, so that you're in control and you say, okay, now you're allowed freedom, but that's actually also not it. It's about does freedom exist? And then from that, you will move
Yeah, no,
on to other
Exactly.
things. Yeah.
This is exactly why I said freedom is something that you live. It's
Yeah.
not something, not a goal you attain.
Yeah.
And it's equal. The freedom is equal for parent and child. It's not. If there's a mismatch between that, then it's a power relationship. It needs to be a consensual relationship. Just like if you were living with an adult, and I like to use an adult, and I like to think about if my child says something that I would react in old ways. I always try and think if there was another adult that I respected and admired, how would I respond to them? And if I respond to my child in exactly the same way, it tends to be far more consensual. But the topic of discipline is a great one, Renika, because when you have that kind of relationship, discipline is an issue when rules are broken. But if you're in a situation where there isn't a need for rules because everything's consensual, the whole issue of discipline just disappears. Okay. Discipline is there really to enforce rules. Yeah, okay, so questions are over. I have one last video, which I think is very, very inspiring, because what we've started here with this conference, with what we're doing on Facebook, with the times we go to unschooling camps and all of this, it's as Manish said in his talk, we're trying to create these communities that will slowly change the world. And this video is one of those really inspirational videos. Huh?